How many do we have now, Steve?
44 attendees.
44?
Yeah. 7 panelists. So just a quick note to our attendees. Thank you for joining us. We are waiting just a few minutes. We started off a little bit later, and we just wanted to give a few minutes for attendees to join our meeting. So please be patient, and we will get started in a few minutes.
Okay, Susan said she was in after closing it and restarting. All right, Kelly's still not in, I guess, so I told him to start that trick and see if it works, and then we'll just have to get rolling.
I see Kelly in here.
Oh, do you?
Yep.
Okay, he wrote back he's in. So I guess that was a trick, but of course you can't get that advice to anybody who isn't already involved.
Yeah, I'm still here, Lauren. I'm just not visible.
Yeah, people said about you a lot.
That this is a good way to be. I'll just speak over your shoulder.
That's good. That's an interesting sound.
Yeah, so please mute if you're not speaking. Thank you. Well, Lauren, I think we're ready to get started.
I'm good when you are.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Good evening, San Marino City Club. Welcome to City Club's second webinar event. My name is Steve Choi, and I have the honor of serving on the City Club board. It is also my pleasure to be your webinar host, as I'll be working behind the scenes tonight. As you may know, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the City Club website shortly after. To ensure the best webinar experience for everyone, all attendees are muted so that we can hear and see our panel of featured speakers. Attendees may submit questions during this meeting by using the Q&A feature. Simply click the Q&A button, type in your question, and click submit. We expect about 100 attendees tonight, which is just about approaches our webinar capacity. And attendees that join our webinar after hitting the capacity threshold will be redirected to our YouTube live stream as well, where they can still enjoy our program tonight. So without further delay, here is your San Marino City Club President, Mr. Lauren Kleinrock.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, we're going to move it right along because we have some technical difficulties with some people getting on, but we've got to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to call the meeting to order and welcome you tonight. We appreciate you being here, or even if you just were trying to be here. I'd ask you to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Be seated. Okay, so we do have a little bit of City Club business to talk about tonight. We do have on our agenda the nominating committee election. There were, it's hard for me to believe this, there was nobody that submitted basically that they really wanted to be on the committee, but I don't know how much fun they're missing. But anyway, we have got some people that stepped up, and we are going to tell you who they are, and then I'm going to move by acclamation that we approve this nominating committee. And if you do not want to approve someone from this committee, then you have a button at your bottom called Q&A, and you can text to probably me, or if you want to make yourself known to everybody, you can text it to everybody. But we'll see if we have a majority that don't want the slate, then we will obviously have a plan B. So first of all, understanding bylaws, automatic members are the president, which would be me, and the first vice president, which would be Kelly Ryan. Also by bylaws, we have the 4 immediate past presidents. They were all gracious enough to step up and say yes. They've all been through this before as part of the committee, so I appreciate their expertise and they're joining us. That's Jim Angelos, Dick Pearson, Frank Chen, and David Wang. And then we are to select at-large membership from the at-large members from the general membership, and they are Carol Blauvelt, Callie Chang, Stephanie Duncan, Janice Lee McMahon, Mike Lynn, and Eugene Sun. So we thank those people for stepping up. So again, I will move by acclamation that we accept this as a nominating committee. And if you do have objections, you can find the button on the bottom that says Q&A and go ahead and text that in. Next steps, all going well, was there will be a nominating committee meeting on June 18th, where we actually start to look to fill positions, and a slate will be submitted to membership at the September meeting, and then we will have you vote during the October meeting. Of course, at this point in time, we don't know whether it will be Zoom or will be in person, but obviously we can handle it either way. So that's what's coming up in terms of that. We are not scheduled for another Zoom meeting until September. We will look at possibly finding a speaker for you in August. If there's interest in that, we can find somebody who we think would be a good person for you. And so we will keep you posted on that. So moving right along, we've got some important stuff to talk about tonight, some great speakers. We're going to start with Aldo Cervantes, the Planning and Building Director. Is he here?
I'm here.
Okay.
Mr. Klein,
Aldo's going to talk about San Marino continuing the road to recovery from COVID-19. So let him have it, Aldo.
Yes, so thank you for having me back. It was a great time last month. And so what I want to say is with the new orders coming down by the county, or by the state first and then by the county subsequent, we have taken the approach of sort of following their guidelines with respect to understanding the rules and regulations and protocols that are assigned to various types of businesses. The last order, of course, came down last Friday with respect to allowing gyms, camps, and museums to begin the operations of opening with specific protocols and guidelines. Simultaneous to the order coming out, we did send out a communication to the various gyms that we have and fitness centers that we have, and communicated out the protocols that are subject to those operations, as well as posted those protocols on our city website. Under our planning and building site, you'll find the protocols and the various operations and requirements under our economic development website. And so we hope that information is critical and important for them to look at. We're sort of making a front page for them to have access to. And as I mentioned in my speech last month, we're looking to sort of pivot from a proactive business retention and attraction to sort of our resource for our businesses. And so again, if and when new orders and regulations and protocols come down by the state and subsequent by the county, we will be there to share that information with our various businesses and operations, and again, be that resources for our business. And that's about it at this point. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Steve, anything come in for Aldo?
no questions for Aldo.
Okay, well, thank you, Aldo. We appreciate that and appreciate your time again. Okay, Fire Chief Mario Rueda is going to talk a little bit more about COVID-19 and how it's impacting the community and what steps are being taken.
So, thank you, Lauren. So Aldo mentioned our move into stage 3, and So within the city, some of the things that Aldo's doing is working to ensure that our businesses are implementing safe practices. So really residents that want to participate in any of those businesses or utilize them, that they know that at least we're offering them the best advice to maintain their safety. Within the city, we have a recovery committee that is working through all the business practices from City Hall to Recreation, Public Works, the Fire Department, the Police Department, to install plexiglass barriers, sanitizing stations, coming up with sanitizing policies. Many of the things that businesses are doing to ensure the safety of residents and others when they come in to visit city businesses. I can tell you though, from the fire department standpoint, we have seen a reduction in the number of calls that we are getting because our dispatch center does identify for us suspected COVID patients. That has been a decline in May, latter part of May and June, which is good news. However, the conference calls that we participate in have generally confirmed what we suspected. I think many of us suspected. As the economy opened up, the cases have started to rise. In fact, one of the factors that they, Department of Health Services looks at very closely is the R factor, which is how often that disease is going to replicate. And the R was in a decline, and unfortunately over the last few weeks, as expected, has increased above 1, which really means it could potentially start moving exponentially. And the concern is that hospital availability, including intensive care beds, starts to get to a place where they can't really handle the number of patients that they might normally be expected to. So all this to say that we're not out of the woods yet. Given the seniors at our community, I would really implore you, continue utilizing safe practices, the distancing, avoid crowds, the masks, and the constant washing of your hands are all going to be practices that will keep you safe, because we're really not out of this yet. And even though what you're seeing on TV and some of the movement that our own Department of Health Services is moving towards the openings, I would implore you, if you're in a risk group, you should avoid those areas where you believe you would be at risk. So if, like I said, the numbers that we have in San Marino for our residents are pretty steady. We've had 24 reported cases, 1 death, and we're holding pretty steady at that. That's good for all of us, but I would implore you, stay the course. We're not done. And that concludes my presentation unless there's questions.
Okay, Chief, thank you so much. Appreciate that. I think
Thank you,
that was
Lauren.
pretty important stuff. And again, we appreciate you coming back this time. All right, Dr. Wilson, Dr. Jeff Wilson, the Superintendent of San Marino Schools, is here to share a couple of things with you. Dr.
Okay,
Wilson.
thanks so much, Lauren. Appreciate the opportunity to share with our community. I want to start off by letting you know that just in the last couple of weeks, our Board of Education took an action on a legacy permit, which will allow students, grandkids of long-term San Marino residents who do not live within our school boundaries to attend our schools. This is a super exciting opportunity. It's something I heard about when I first got here about 11 months ago, of folks who would love to have their grandkids attend, but perhaps their children can't yet afford to live in the community. So if you have grandkids living in nearby communities, would like for them to have the chance to attend our great schools, please contact Lou Jiang at the district office, and Lou will be able to help you with that. Well, listen, I want to talk about school reopening. There's a lot of chatter out there. It was good to hear from Chief and earlier from Aldo about what's going on from the city perspective. From the school district, we have a county superintendent who briefs us on a weekly basis. And so about a month ago, we instituted a school reopening task force. There were approximately 70 people on the task force, including teachers and staff and kids and community members and both of our chiefs and physicians and nurses. And it's an opportunity for us to develop a written plan that we can share with the Board of Education, the staff, and the community to identify resources, supplies, and trainings and support to our schools and departments. They're looking to provide resources for student and staff as they return to school, and training about what does a safe campus look like and what might a safe work environment be. Also, we're going to have to update our community, keep our community educated about the resources that are there for them. And then, of course, we got to deal with the fact of when those bodies come back to our campus, how are we screening them and assessing them as they arrive? And then also, like, how do we deal with kids that get sick at school or staff members who have issues as well? So that's what's going on with the task force. They're looking at 5 areas. They're looking at instruction, so teaching and learning. They're looking at safety and health, social and emotional support systems, family and community engagement, and then also with our operations. So many questions, right? I mean, I get questions daily about, hey, when is school opening? What's it going to look like? I mean, we're hearing, will kids come back if we reopen our schools? Will it be safe? How can we ensure social distancing for second graders, right? Still trying to figure that one out. How would we retrofit our classrooms for safety? How would we put 25 kids in a room and still ensure social distancing, right? And what about screen time? We're hearing a lot about kids being on their computers all day long, and what does that impact on their anxiety and on their brain? How will grading change? You know, what about teachers or staff who are immune compromised? So lots and lots of questions with very few answers. And so as we begin to move towards this new model, we're going to be looking at instruction and what does a new curriculum look like using open online educational resources. How is the instructional delivery changing? How are we going to meet the needs of our special populations? And what about the ever increasing role of instructional technology? With health and safety, what about student, staff, visitor integration or interactions and ingress and egress from our schools? How do you serve meals in a safe way? What are new campus cleaning procedures going to look like that ensure that our students are safe and healthy? And then just looking at other key systems and services. With social emotional support systems, I bet you every one of us tonight has felt a pretty high level of anxiety with regards to all these changes that we've experienced in our own personal lives. But when you start talking about parents who are suddenly acting as teachers, right, and kids who are stuck indoors all day, this really opens up a whole new area of looking at social emotional support systems. And then family and community engagement's never been more important. We want to ensure that we have effective communication systems, that we're regularly engaging our stakeholders, which would be our students, our parents, our community members. And then how can we enhance our community partnerships with our city, with our parks and rec, college and universities, faith-based organizations. You've already heard about our chiefs. We already have a great relationship with our fire department, police department, but we'll be looking to enhance those community partnerships. And then finally with operations, again, how can we deliver on maintaining effective and efficient operations while following best practices? So the question is, when will things be back to normal? I think we all want to know that, right? And I think that kind of prompts a second question, which is, will things be back to normal? And what is that new normal? And maybe even, will things ever be normal again? And these are questions we're having to sort of deal with at the schools and what the future looks like. And if you had the opportunity to drop in on one of our great teachers' lessons, you would see something similar to what you're looking at right now. You'd see kids on the screen interacting with their teacher, receiving one-on-one instruction. It's just a whole different world right now that our kids, our teachers, our staff, our principals are experiencing. So I just want to kind of wrap this up by talking a little bit about technology. Technology obviously has been around since the start of man. With regards to instructional technology, it's really been ramping up over the last several years with, so for instance, Chromebooks taking the place of more expensive devices, allowing us to get Chromebooks in the hands of many, many kids. So technology now, we look at it as a way to engage and connect our students with their teachers and counselors and principals. It's now looked at as an integrated tool for teaching and learning, very different from the past. It's also a tool for assessing what students are learning. And then also it comes down to a tool of access and equity so that we can bridge that digital divide throughout our society. And then finally, as a tool for research. So this is very clearly a pivot point in educational history. Just as the manufacturing model came into play in the 1920s through 40s, whatever we're building now is going to have profound implications for generations of students to come. I just want to close, I'm at my last minute here, by addressing real quickly, you're all very much aware of a lot of the media posts and news stories surrounding some of the actions of current and former students. I just would like to say, you know, after being alerted to inappropriate race-based social media posts from a couple of present high school students, I sent an initial message to students, families, and community members on June 2nd, making clear our intolerance for racism and discrimination and providing our students and families with resources to help facilitate, you know, vital discussions throughout the summer break. At this past Tuesday's board meeting, I made a statement at the beginning condemning the actions of current and former San Marino students who've engaged in posting well-documented racial, ethnic, and gender-based hate messages. And, you know, we recognize that statement was really only a starting point. And we're currently investigating the cyberbullying of current students by a small group of former and current students. And we're working very, very closely on a daily basis with Chief Encontro and the San Marino Police Department in the investigation of any possible illegal communication or activity. You know, we're going to keep engaging our students, our parents, our community in this discussion. I want to stress the fact that the vast majority of the 80 emails I've received have come from former students as really 8 to 10 years ago, kids who graduated back in the 2010 to 2012 or 14 era. And the news agencies want you to believe that we are being unresponsive to current students, but I want you to know I have not received myself a single email from one of the quote unquote whistleblowers, but we are going to work really hard to reach those kids and really help them, support them, give them the resources they need to be successful. So the Board of Education has scheduled a special meeting for June 23rd from 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. really as an opportunity for the board and staff to listen deeply to our public, to hear from staff about plans to address implicit bias, issues of diversity and equity, and to discuss present and future trainings for staff and students concerning the myriad of issues raised. So we're deeply committed to this, the creation of a culture of acceptance and understanding in which every one of our students sees and experiences our schools as welcoming places where their backgrounds, thoughts, identities are valued, and where each student can grow as individuals, as respectful and respected citizens. So with that, I will say thank you for the time. I tried to keep it as close to 7 minutes as I could, Lauren. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wilson. Appreciate it. And we also have Chief Encontro here tonight with us again. He's going to talk about recent protests and potential issues. So, Chief, thanks again for joining us tonight. And it is your turn if he's here.
I'm here. Thank you very much, Lauren. It's great to see you. And it's great to know everyone is still interacting through the City Club. A couple things I just want to talk about. First of all, we had a protest a couple Saturdays ago. At the most, we had about 700 people exercising their First Amendment rights. Our goal when we met with the organizers and then assisting the people to be able to protest was to make sure that everyone was able to have their voices heard, important voices, important messages, things that not only law enforcement need to listen to, but all of us need to listen to. And it went very successfully, and the message was came across loud and strong, and we appreciated everything we heard, and we're looking forward to continuing the dialogue with a lot of different organizations and groups, and just being part of a professional career like law enforcement. We look forward to moving ahead. The next thing I just want to briefly tell you that this past June 4th, we received information about racial posts on social media. And because of the significance of the material, we immediately began an investigation. And we've been working very hard on this investigation, working with the school district. We've brought in experts and consulted with the FBI. and the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. We've made contact with the person who identifies himself or herself as the whistleblower in an attempt to gain additional information. Today, we posted a media release on our website. And in that media release, we talk a little bit more in depth about what we're doing. But also the second part of it, and I think this is almost most important for this community, is we talked about what is hate speech, what is a hate crime, what is a hate incident, what is terrorist threats, and what we need or what is needed to show that these crimes occurred, a hate crime occurred. A hate incident is something that we may hear often enough where there's name calling, there's insults, distributing hate material in a public place, or displaying hate material on your own property. Those are protected rights under the First Amendment. And we have to recognize that. The speech that we've been hearing, these images that we've seen are disturbing. They are ugly. They are not what we expect, but it is a First Amendment privilege. When it becomes a crime is if there is similar information, there's name calling, insults, the material, plus it's combined with a crime. And that can be any crime. It can be a physical assault. It can be a burning of a cross. It could be trespassing with the intent to do some harm to somebody. It could be threats to do harm. And we have to have the crime pointed at someone who has a disability. It's based upon their gender, their nationality, race or ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or association with a person or group with one or more of these actual perceived characteristics. In simplest terms, a hate crime must include both the expression of hate and the commission of a crime. What we need from the community is if anybody is aware of someone who may be a victim, someone who perceives themselves as a victim, to please come forward. We want to talk to you. We would like to get additional information. We want to prove or disprove these allegations. It is extremely important that once we get involved, that we're able to do our job. Because some of the people involved in this are juveniles, we're not giving any further information. We have an obligation and a duty to make sure that we protect juveniles. But we do want to talk to you. Please come forward. And we will do a complete and thorough investigation. This investigation will have to go to the LA County District Attorney's Office to make a determination of whether there's going to be a filing of any crime. And if it meets the specific items and requirements of a hate crime. If it doesn't, it doesn't. If it does, we'll move forward. But I think this is an important step to recognizing that we must recognize our differences. We must honor those differences. We must understand and support each other. This isn't a conversation about tolerance. It's not tolerance. It's an understanding. It's a welcoming of different views. It's a welcoming of different peoples, of different genders, sexual orientation, and we need to move forward from there. But let me assure you, we are taking each one of these allegations extremely seriously, and we will not stop until there's nothing left to investigate, there's no one else to talk to, and with the concurrence of the district attorney, there's no more crime to investigate. But please help us. Parents, please come forward. Grandparents, if you hear of this, please come forward. And please take a look at the website and read the press release. We have reference material from the United States Department of Justice and also from the California Attorney General's Office, State of California Department of Justice. And I think that's going to also lead you to other information. So take the time, read the press release, and if anyone has any questions, I'm available for right now.
Chief and Contra, we have one question. Do you think this is coming from inside San Marino or outside of the city?
Based upon the people that we are seeing in the messaging, it's a San Marino issue. There may be people from outside also involved, but it also appears as if these issues are clearly within the city.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much.
Chief, thank you very much. As always, appreciate it again. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers tonight who are giving us these updates. And so we will continue with these updates if there are things that the membership seems to enjoy. So thank you all again. All right, and now we get to our featured speaker. Randy Shulman is a former student of mine at San Marino High School. He's currently the Huntington's Vice President for Advancement. Now, he often says that I'm responsible for all his success. No, he doesn't say that. He works closely with staff from throughout the organization as they further programmatic dynamism. I wish I'd invented that phrase. Over the past 2 decades, the Huntington Gardens and Galleries have served an expanding set of diverse audiences. It is now home to 1,800 scholars annually, and humanities research being conducted at Huntington makes it one of the most active in the nation. Currently, a central focus of its expanding education programs is using the collections to help K-12 teachers engage their students through innovative learning. I know some of the SMHS teachers and students who have been involved in those programs, and the learning opportunity for students is phenomenal. At the same time, new galleries, gardens, and exhibitions for the public are reaching new audiences in ways never before possible. These have become wonderfully useful tools through which to investigate and express the best aspects, still learning how to talk after my cancer, the best aspects of our shared humanity. As Randy has said, the Huntington is something of which we in the San Gabriel Valley should be very proud. He adds, aside from becoming the stewards of California's social history DNA for scholars, on the public side, we help immerse students, teachers, and casual visitors to the beauty of nature, art, and humanities. We offer many fine examples of what makes life worth living. Randy's own history is intertwined in the story. He came to the Huntington as a 12-year-old volunteer with a dream. That dream was to have a chance to someday make a difference in what he considered a special place. He joined the staff full-time in 1999 and assumed his current role in 2009. Each year, he teaches a class entitled Huntington 101 that helps to explain the international significance of the research being done at the Huntington. Randy is a graduate of San Marino Schools, Pasadena City College, Cal Poly Pomona, and USC, where he earned an MPA in Public Administration. He has also been involved on the Board of Union Station, serving as its president, board chair, I guess is what they call it. Randy and his wife, Mona, reside in Pasadena, and it is my pleasure to present San Marino's own Mr. Randy Shulman. Randy, thank you.
Oh, Lauren, thank you very much for that great welcome, very warm welcome. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you tonight. I went back and looked in my San Marino City Club file. I spoke to the City Club in 2010, and I realized that so much has happened in those 10 years. So I thought when Lauren approached us with the request for a speaker, I thought 10 years, it's time for me to come back. So I'm really glad to be here with you, and thanks for the opportunity. In the next 25 minutes or so, I'll walk you through some great material, and then I'll take questions if people have them. Let me just start with one thing before I turn the screen over to my slides. For almost 3 months now, we haven't had anybody on the grounds of the Huntington except rabbits and squirrels and hawks and things. This has never happened in 100 years. And what it did is it gave us a chance to think about how to best serve communities that we work with, even if they can't come to us. So it's really been a sombering moment to try to figure out how to make a difference for people, because they need us more than ever for their solitude and for all the things that Lauren mentioned. But it's been a real challenge because we weren't planning on it in the same way as the minute you need it. So for instance, we probably won't have school kids come next year for the first few months or more. How do you work with teachers to give them ever more material to help them and to help them translate what we have to offer? So let me just show you some slides. I'm just going to share the screen. It'll take me a second to get set up here. And there we go. Okay, so Lauren, you can see it, right? I'm good?
I can
Steve?
see it. Looks
Okay.
good to me. Past into present.
So one of the things that's different is that when I used to talk about the history of our place, I used to talk about Mr. Huntington. And at some point it dawned upon me, it's Mr. and Mrs. Huntington. Mrs. Huntington had a lot to do with it, quite a lot to do with it. And it was about time to include her in the real description of the place. And there is so much to talk about when we talk about the Huntington, but it all comes back to the history of San Marino. And you know what you're looking at here, right? You all know what this is. This is Wilson's Lake or Lake Vineyard. This is Lacey Park now. And this was the water that, as it flowed down from Pasadena and made its way through the canyons to collect there, where it's now Lacey Park. But San Marino had such a great beginning as a community when it had the ability to see from one end to the other. And I always tell people, you know, you see this beautiful tree city, and it didn't look like that originally. It was much easier to see from one end to the other. Some of the early residents that lived in San Marino, and many of you know this if you're involved in the Historical Society, you know how many people were senators, governors, district attorneys, many other things lived in San Marino aside from other people. And this is one of our famous residents. And I don't know if you recognize this picture. This is Georgie. Georgie as a boy. Georgie grew up and went to military academy, and then from there entered the military and became General Patton. So this is George Patton, who spent a lot of time riding horses around the space that's now the Huntington. And of course, who would have ever thought that the ranch that Mr. and Mrs. Huntington settled on in their retirement years would turn into such an incredible dynamic place. And people always ask me, what would happen if Mr. Huntington and Mrs. Huntington came back and they showed up tomorrow at the place? What would they think? And I have to imagine the satisfaction that they would feel for what's been done with the mission that was a personal mission before it was an institutional mission, which was the collection of the natural world, the celebration of incredible, strange botanical things from around the world, which it went from being a folly of interesting things to being scientifically very important for biodiversity, to a cultural space that connects cultures throughout the world through San Marino, which is an amazing, powerful thing to be able to do, more important now than ever. But also to be able to celebrate the fact that the Huntingtons were at a spot in time where they could get things, and they could get things that were available in the world that now these things cannot be collected in the same way. They were out there and they were available, and many of them were sinking into private hands, never to be enjoyed by the public ever again. And that's not what the plan was. The plan from the start was that someday this would be something that would have a public face. And it went and went and went. And we continued in that line for 100 years now. So we're in our centennial year, and we did a lot to celebrate that centennial until COVID hit. And we've had to recalibrate a bit. But I want to remember a couple of things that are good to mention. And one of them is that you walk by, when you visit, you see these large buildings, and sometimes you don't know what's happening inside. And I just want to reiterate the fact that the mission has so many different parts to it, but one of them is for people from all over the world to come and make use of these materials. Not everything can be out for the public. Things are fragile and one of a kind. I always laugh because we get famous people who are involved in government, the ambassador of a country, or the cabinet member, or the former president of a country, who will come. And there are things within these collections that are important to them and their people that are not in Washington, D.C., or New York, or Philadelphia, or Chicago. They're in San Marino. These things are in San Marino. These treasures are here, and we make use of them. And whether they're books or manuscripts, they could be important works of art and also botanical specimens. So we run the gamut. And that's why I say they would be very pleased to know that others can share in these things. They're not just locked in a vault somewhere. They're actually used. And also the fact that more and more people within our culture are looking for a place to go to just think, to have beauty, to have serenity, to take a breath. And so we more and more are seeing ourselves as that place. And it's very educational, and there's a million things, and as you all know, there's always a million things going on at our place. But the whole idea was for it to have public benefit. And whether it's directly to the public or through their teachers or through the academic community, and we do it all concurrently. But it's really resulted in some wonderful, wonderful things. We work with over 60 community partners, and this could be Villa Esperanza or a school district or other nonprofits that bring people to us. And I have some pictures of some of those examples. Here's Girl Scouts. This is a group from South Pass, I think. But they're learning about something that none of them ever knew existed, that you could actually have a career restoring paintings. And guess what? 4 or 5 of these young women walked out of this room and said, I want to do that. How do you do that? It's like CSI. Now, she wasn't wearing her lab coat that day, but she's pretty formidable with the lab coat, with the paintbrushes sticking out of the pockets. This is Christina O'Connell, who's our paintings conservator. And of course, the interpretation of the things within the collections are very important too. So it's not good enough just to have the things sitting on a shelf. It's what you do with them and who you encourage to use the collections. And I'll explain how we're starting to do things we've never been able to do before with living artists and young emerging artists who would never be able to come to San Marino and work with our collections to work on their work and then use it for public benefit. So this is really something that's newer for us. Of course, I can't escape without showing the picture of me with good hair as a 12-year-old. But there I am on my, I don't know, second month of work at the Huntington as a volunteer. Nobody uses a watering can at the Huntington. It was a prop for the LA Times, but I loved the fact that they asked me. And I've worked 40 plant sales since. 40 times I've worked because I volunteered for this picture. So I really feel very strongly about the place, as you can tell. Okay, so just a quick review about the Huntingtons. Mr. Huntington, Mrs. Huntington were born the same year. They got married to each other when they were age 60, and they had been married to other people prior. Arabella's first husband, Collis Huntington, had passed away. Mr. Huntington Henry was divorced. There were 4 children from his first marriage. Arabella had 1 son from her first marriage. And then, of course, within this family, there's also Uncle Collis Huntington, who in American politics and American affairs in the 1880s, 90s, this was the man. And he spent very little time out here, but his young nephew, who was his protege, did. And at first it was Sacramento. And you recall the 4 guys, the big 4 that were running a hardware store during the gold rush. And Sacramento was going to be the most important city ever in the history of the world because so much money was coming out of the hills through the gold. So these 4 friends had this hardware store selling picks and shovels to gold miners. They never had to touch the dirt to get rich. Stanford, Hopkins, Crocker, and Huntington. And one day, sitting around the table, they said, we need to create a railroad and connect to the rest of the country and have people be able to come to California, the promised land. And so these guys who knew nothing about what that entailed started. And in the end, Collis Huntington became one of the biggest and most successful lobbyists in American history. And building the Transcontinental Railroad was also seen as a way to help the country the Union stay together. But anyway, they built it and they connected it to the Union Pacific, the Central Pacific. This is Collis's son, or it's actually Arabella's son. We're not sure who the father is. That's another story, which is a great 2-hour story. And he was also very active in the cultural world. Okay, so here's a reenactment of the Golden Spike. And so this is where the Big 4 and the Union Pacific get together, and then some people got very wealthy bringing people out to this coast. And of course, the Huntingtons then turned to other things at some point, and they started to think about the retirement. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Huntington she was his aunt by marriage, and she had been widowed, and about 6 or 7 years after that happened, they start to correspond. They both enjoy collecting things. She collects art, he collects books and manuscripts and photography, and they have a lot of fun talking about what they're buying and what they're doing. Well, pretty soon that turned into a love affair. And so by 1913, they're married, and she lived on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, and he lived downtown Los Angeles at 5th and Main. The building is still there. It was the streetcar terminal, and he owned the building and built it. But he said, no, I've bought this property out in a place near San Gabriel. It didn't have a name yet. It was kind of it had many different names, Oak Knoll, Lake Vineyard. Anyway, so by then it started to be called San Marino. And he had bought the land, which was about 700 acres at the time. He bought the 5 different parcels that made up the place. And he said, I want you to come live out here. I'm going to build a beautiful house. I and will take the ranch and make beautiful cultural garden space like Versailles and other places. So she didn't want to leave Manhattan, and eventually he got her to come out here. And so off they went to Southern California. By 2012, 1912, 1913, the house was finished and they moved into it. They only lived in the house off and on for about 10 years until she died. She would leave here for 3 or 4 months and then take off to the East Coast or to Europe and then come back. But you can see that at some point, he wants to move his great library here. So he puts it on train cars, and it says, Huntington smuggles 2 cats across US, priceless art in volumes for Oak Knoll. They still hadn't gotten the name straight about what the place was. And he builds the library building in 1919 because she says, you can't keep all that stuff in the house. You have to build another building. Sound familiar? Okay, so here he is admiring his beautiful estate, and the estate had incredible geology, which enabled a perched water table, so that the water table was higher here and you could actually collect water from runoff too in certain seasons, and anything would grow. So this was a noble experiment about taking the area which we think of as grassland or desert or whatever you want to characterize it as. It was the Garden of Eden. Everything they put in the ground grew. And now this was a period of time when there wasn't a drought series necessarily the same that we've experienced recently. And they got very busy planting a lot of things. At the same time, north of us in Pasadena, you started to see the community establish itself with people coming east for the wintertime and coming to this town had a telephone exchange, a symphony, an opera. This was even more technologically up to date than Los Angeles. Pasadena was really a with it town, and there was a lot of people that came with it who wanted to support cultural things and scientific things. And so this is tied into the history of Caltech. And George Ellery Hale, who was one of the great movers and shakers in establishing Caltech and bringing it to national prominence, also was after Mr. Huntington. What are you going to do with all that stuff? We're going to have science over here in Pasadena. In San Marino, you should have art and culture and humanities. And Mr. Huntington listened and said, well, we'll see. But eventually we got what he suggested. And this was a major part of it. As you all know, straight down Huntington Drive and other places, the Pacific Electric system with 1,200 miles of right-of-way, one of the best systems ever built, never made much money and was slow, jerky, and whatever. But what it did is it developed Southern California, because they would extend these things out into the middle of nowhere to places like Glendale, Laverne, you name it, Redondo Beach, and then they could build subdivisions and get people there. So meanwhile, on the home front, they were building their house. And those of you who know the Huntington Art Gallery, you know, it's a neo, Aldo, I don't know what you call it, it's a neoclassical Italianate building that looks like it's supposed to be 250 years old, but it's a 1911 reinforced concrete and steel building. And it belies what it really is, because they built it on the top of an earthquake fault. They knew, even before Long Beach in 1933, they knew they wanted an institutional style building. It was going to be something after their lives. And so they built it with that in mind. And until Aaron Spelling built his house in Beverly Hills in 1990, this was the largest house in Southern California. Hard to believe it took that long to be eclipsed, but now it has been. And it was beautiful. It was really an experiment in great living in a place where everything would grow. And of course, in 1921, he buys, among the things he bought in 1921, and I don't want to run out of time, so I just want to go through this quickly, but he bought the Blue Boy. And it was the most ever paid for painting at the time. It was a big deal. It went on display around the world before it came here. As it was on its way here, it was put on display. It was actually a publicity stunt by the dealers to raise their profile, of course. But here it is coming off the train in Pasadena. And even in my lifetime, this cart still lived at the Amtrak station in Pasadena. But there's Blue Boy coming off the train, going to San Marino, where it eventually went on the wall and then was enjoyed by millions. And this is 1949. Here's William Hertrick, who was Mr. Huntington's superintendent of the grounds, and he is the responsible party for bringing the incredible know-how of how to cultivate and make the incredible bounty of what was planted work. And you know, you have things that are dry on one slope and jungle on the next slope, and it all works. He's also Oscar Thurner's uncle. I think he's the uncle. And Oscar Thurner was your first parks director, and Lacey Park. Okay, so the public starts to come and investigate. In 1928, they open the doors, people rush in, And they came in a variety of different ways, but they wore their hats and gloves. It was very fancy. And they respectfully looked up at things, and they started what became the visitation of the Huntington. I'd love to have that bell, the hammer back in that bell, but we don't like people ringing it at 2 o'clock in the morning. And of course, the Japanese house is another great example of things that are reborn. This used to live on Fair Oaks and Colorado, or Fair Oaks in California, excuse me, in Pasadena. And it was moved to lock, stock, and barrel when they built the Japanese garden within a 6-month period. And it was restored in 2012 to beyond its original grandeur. I mean, they did a beautiful job. So here's another example. They had a swampy hillside on the east side of the Huntington. Hertrick said, I can go out to the southwest and other places in Mexico and grab a bunch of specimens and bring them back, which you couldn't do now if you wanted to. And we're just going to plant a bunch of stuff. We're very cost effective. I won't spend a lot of money. This became the desert garden that you know today. And it went from this to this. One of the most biodiverse gardens in the entire world. 65% of all the desert species ever identified to date live in this garden or in our greenhouses. And there's somebody there right now who's on loan to us from another organization who's now starting to figure out that in some ways we have one of the most biodiverse gardens beyond the desert garden in the world in one place. So I look forward to finding out more about that. I've always talked to you, whenever I've talked to anybody about the Huntington, about what treasures lie in the vault. And these are things that are predictable. The academic world's known about them for a long time, but there's so much more than the big headline items. Another thing I want to mention to you is that what's a major part of the library's collections are archives, deep archives of many objects, not just one piece of paper, but a whole group of things that together help to illustrate something's background or history, whether it be the Civil War or growing up on the east side of Manhattan in the 20s. It goes on and on and on. There's a million different ways to slice and dice what's in the library. It also has to do with California's DNA. This is Y.C. Hong, who was the first Chinese American to pass the bar in Southern California. And he was one of the pioneers of the modern Chinatown, which grew up in the 30s. And his family continued to be very involved. His archive, he became a civil rights attorney and was responsible for many, many, many assists to the Chinese American community and others. His papers are at the Huntington. And this is what those kinds of things look like. It's just, this is a beautiful example. They're not always beautiful examples. Many, many boxes. They also can be individual objects. And this is something we just bought last year, which is a scroll depicting Commodore Perry's first visit to Japan. And it's a fantastic item. And this someday will be on display for people and interpreted for people. We also have social history, the entire archives of a photographer who was the principal photographer for House Beautiful magazine. Maynard Parker was his name. And so there's 45,000 images in his collection, I think, that are within our collection. But also, it goes back to things that are one of a kind. So this is an account book this is something called the Shrewsbury. I think I might be mixing up my collections. But this is from a stop on the Underground Railroad. And they kept track of people at this particular stop and where they went and who they were. And it had to be secret because if this was caught. But anyway, somebody saved these things. And this is a recent addition to our collections. And so people who are studying these moments in our history can still find things that are direct primary sources to learn more about what was happening and what people were doing. And that's why it's really important that we continue to be available to people, even if they can't come to us personally because of what's going on now. We are answering things by Zoom and by phone and by computer because we have to keep this going. Okay, here's a couple of stories real quick. The Japanese Heritage House. This is, when I met Aldo the first time, I said, we will be your most interesting client because the projects that we bring are not simple and they have incredible dimension. But this house existed in Japan. It's a 320-year-old house. And it turns out that the owners of this house, they were descendants of a samurai warrior who lived in the valley, in this beautiful valley in southern Japan, and within sight of a castle. And if the castle signaled that there was trouble, the samurai would get on his horse and ride up and defend the castle. Well, after many years, the various wars within the culture in Japan, this family was on the losing side. So they became honorably discharged as samurais, and they became the magistrates of the village. And this became the village town hall, and it also became the storehouse for the seed corn for their rice crop every year. And the other thing it became is the archive of the town. So the family lived here for many generations until after World War II. And by then, the fields around the house had grown up into housing subdivisions, and the family had moved, and they were in various places. But at some point, we met them, and they were living in Beverly Hills and working for Sony Music. And they said, we have this house. There are many examples of these houses in Japan, and ours is one of the best, but it does not have any context around it anymore. And it would be better at your place because you could tell this story and it would be a beautiful example. So Jim Folsom, who many of you know, who is like the Pied Piper, and started to talk about this project. And I shook my head and I said, how many millions are you talking about? Where are we going to get the money? It's a big deal. And how are you going to take this house down? Who's going to give you permission in Japan to take a treasure like that and move it here? Well, it happened. It happened because they wanted the house to have people to be able to visit it and understand traditional Japanese culture. So this is the family. Mrs. Yokoi is on the left, and the one in the baseball cap is that's Adam Yokoi, and they live in Beverly Hills. And that's our staff there visiting with them in Japan when they figured out that this would be a viable project if you could raise X millions of dollars to make it work. So we got to work on this because it really was a dream. And I just want to give you, this is the valley where this was all fields. It was all rice fields before. Obviously now it's not. So the house, this is the remains of the castle. Most of the castle was demolished, but this is where it used to sit. That's the valley, and somewhere down in the middle is where the house was sitting. So here's what it looks like. There's a gatehouse on the right side. It's where the people who worked for the family lived. And then the family had its own little garden inside of that second wall. The two treasure houses in the back are where the archives and the seed corn were kept. And that's about a 3,000 square foot house. And it has a very unusual system that the samurai could climb up into the rafters and escape out the roof. And if anybody came, to try to attack the samurai, there was a way out. That all survived, and it will be visible, I think. So where are we going to put this house? Those of you who know the Chinese and Japanese gardens, on the bottom left, you see it says Japanese house. That's the Japanese house that you know of when you look at the Japanese garden. And up on the hill, a little bit to the north, northwest of it, there is a mesa. And there is an empty area there where the house is going to be located. Further to the right where it says Hillside Pavilion, that's the Chinese garden, that's the stargazing pavilion. So there will actually be a walking path for the public to walk back and forth and to go into the walled garden of this house, plus to visit the house. And the house also will have some of the original objects in it, scrolls and other things that will make it very special for people to visit. But it's also usable as a space to talk to people. So it's a very valuable thing to be able to do it in the context with people sitting on mats as they would have traditionally. This is what it looks like inside. Before the house was dismantled and brought to another place in Japan where it was then put back into, they had to reassemble it and take out all the masonry, which doesn't travel. It had a Shinto blessing that was undertaken to enable the house to travel to us with its aura intact. This is various things going on. It was I did not get to go, but a couple of us got to go, and it was a very meaningful ceremony. And then the hard part started, taking it apart to bring it here. The roof tiles could not be used here. They have to be, ours have to be accredited for fire and safety reasons. Anything that's made of plaster has to be left there because those things can't be brought into the country. And then they had to go through and gingerly look at every piece of the wood and everything is surveyed and cataloged, and if anything is broken or damaged, it can be replaced. Japan is one of the last places left that something that's 320 years old, you can still replace the board exactly from the same kind of tree, from the same forest, sometimes by the same company. And so this is what was done. It was taken down to what you call take it down to the bones. These are 320-year-old logs. It's reassembled there in Japan, near Osaka, where they then had to test all the pieces and make sure all the pieces fit together and fix the ones that needed to be rejoined. And then things are packaged for shipment to San Marino. And this is now on site and waiting for the rest of the project. So the project is soon. We could not get the Japanese artisans that have to come over. There's 20 of them because of COVID. So we're waiting for that to be worked out. And hopefully at some point in July or August, they can work on it and then get this done. The hard part has been done. Putting it back together, not the hard part. Okay, now I realize that I'm going to run out of time. So I'm going to skip this one except to tell you something very briefly. I had showed you this picture earlier, and I just want you, this is a great example. This is a recently acquired archive that documents an 18th century investigation into a land deal in Pennsylvania. It's called the Walking Purchase. And it was the largest, this was a group of people in Pennsylvania that defrauded the Native American tribe that was there, who were known as the Delawares, out of more than 1 million acres of land. And the collection has 75 manuscripts, affidavits, depositions, sworn testimonies, maps, letters, etc., that involved everybody involved, so that it really chronicles what exactly happened. And this is a very important moment in American history, but it talks a lot about not only the exact moment of what happened and who did what and those things, but also sheds light on who the people were and who was operating and what was going on. This was in 1737. This is long before the Revolutionary War. These are French and Indian war times. This is material that many times we don't have time in history classes to talk about. And so it's a very interesting thing, but none of this stuff was ever thought to have survived. And these personal diaries and account books and other things, this is one of the great examples of why people can take these things and you can do a million things with this, from K through 12 up through very high academic books and dissertations. But this kind of stuff continues to come to us. So I can give it takes me half an hour to tell this story. But I just want to get to this because this is what's happening today. You all know that we've been building the Chinese garden for more than 10 years, and we are now finishing it. And it should be almost finished when we open tomorrow to our members. And this has been a great source of pride because I've been involved since this was not even a hole in the ground yet. But also because we said we were going to do this authentically. We were going to create an authentic Chinese Ming Dynasty scholars garden, and we were not going to have it be a veneer like a Knott's Berry Farm. It was going to be the real thing made by the real people, and it would have cultural programming to match. And after 10 years, I can tell you that I believe that's happened, aside from it being just a joy to walk through. So what's happening is that there are pieces that we wanted to finish, and it's primarily in 2 different spots: in the far back north side behind the pavilion that was already there, and then up on the top of the hill to the west of it. So this is the Flowery Brush Studio. This is a new art gallery space, and there's another building behind it that has no windows and only 1 door, and that's for things that are also display of art, but things that are very sensitive. This is for sculpture and things that are made of stone and steel that can be out for people to look at. But this took a lot of work. This was and the crew that had to, aside from Jim Folsom, just about everybody else involved in the second phase of this was not here the first time we did this. So we had to go back to China. We had to re-engineer our connections and all of the different, imagine how many chief financial officers I've gone through in 10 years when somebody new comes in and they say, wait, you're going to get that stone from China? Can't you get it cheaper from Kansas? No, it has to be the real stone. Well, why would you do that? You're going to get the roof tiles in China, and having to go through it and describe it, and so that they understand that it has to be the real thing, and it would be okay, and it would be cost effective ultimately, and it was. But these are the spots in the garden that are just about to open. The last of the landscaping is not in yet. This is the Penjing garden, and so these boxes you see will have pedestals with Penjing, which is like bonsai, in containers that are elevated for people to enjoy. It's a great space. None of this was open to the public before, so this is it's great to be able to have depth to the garden. It really is 12 acres now, and it's just gorgeous. And we've been able to buy some incredibly beautiful things that between the stones, the peak stones, and some of the great plants. So here's going back. Okay, I'm just going to play this real quick. So It had to have steel because of earthquake standards, and then we go with the traditional parts on top of that. And over a very short period of time, maybe 4 months, this building was built. 55 workers came from China. They were incredible. They lived in Monterey Park while they were working here, and they were brought up by bus every day and then brought back. And they did a fantastic job. And if you love the Chinese garden that you know from before, you will love this even more because the depth of design and nuance and complexity is twice as much with these pieces that we built. We got better at it the second time around. Okay, so just briefly, where do we go from here? We're in our 100th year, we're in our centennial, and especially in an era that we find ourselves in now, it is more important to use our collections and the Huntington's voice than ever, especially in our community partnerships with schools that we work with. This is a school from East LA performing Shakespeare on the steps of the Huntington Mansion. Talking about people within our collections, Octavia Butler has been very, very important for us. This is a local resident who passed away very young, but she was a very renowned science fiction writer and one of the first African-American female science fiction writer of that kind of note. And her entire collection came to us. Also, in trying to thresh out and have dialogue about what's going on in the world, this is the Librarian of Congress, who was at the Huntington, I think, in December. Carla Hayden is her name, and very inspirational to the Library of Congress to come to our library, and but also to be able to talk about things that are going on in the world and how we can help. So here's another example. This is a group called Pavlov, and Pavlov takes young cancer survivors that need a therapeutic way as they're recovering, and so they use photography as their therapy, and they come to the Huntington to take photos, and they put their work on display, and they have ceremonies when they graduate from the program, and this is one of the 60 ongoing programs we've got like this. But also inviting young artists in to the Huntington who are commissioning their own work and displaying their own work next to our historical collections. These are adding young new voices to historical collections, which is not something we've done for more than a couple of years, and it's a very important part of what we do now, so that you bring your collections alive. You don't just put, in the old days, a museum was a mausoleum of culture. You put something on a pedestal, you invited people and you said, this is what's important, this is what's good taste, this is what's valuable. That doesn't work anymore. You have to have people who are practitioners within the world come in and make sense of it for a million different reasons. And we've been able to do this and attract the kind of support we need to bring people in and help them with their work. Also, to be able to have interesting conversations. This was a history of the labor movement in Los Angeles, primarily Latino and Latinx labor movement. And of course, working directly with students and with schools. So these are YWCA kids with Jim. And again, also taking another look at how we look at our collections so that we're not just putting historical things on display with no connection to present day. So this is actually a video of dancers. There were several videos made by this Carolina Castedo, who was commissioned to do these things at the Huntington. And this was in conjunction with East LA College and the Vincent Price Art Gallery. Great collaboration. But we're doing things like this now, and it's very, very exciting. Also, we continue to collect. This is a very important African-American artist. There are many, many different points coming together at the same time, trying to have many, many other voices as part of the Huntington. Okay. And then, of course, we still do mundane things and fix things and make things available digitally and make sure that the biodiversity is promoted and that we're sharing with other places around the world. So that's my talk. I will stop sharing the screen and see if there are questions. I really appreciate you giving me the time to spend on this great subject, which I love so much. So how would you like to do the questions?
Well, we have 4 questions. So we can go through the questions. Let's go ahead and first, do you still publish in your newsletter to scholars that visit the library for study?
So do we still publish our newsletter? So first of all, many of the people that come to Huntington publish on their own, in their own institutions or through other arrangements and contracts. But we do publish, so we have the Frontiers magazine, which is put out twice a year. where our scholars are telling stories about what they're working on. So that will continue. It will continue virtually. It will not continue in paper, unfortunately. We're all going to have to get used to that world where it's just too expensive. But we will continue to tell those stories. Okay. When will the tea room reopen? Okay, so that's a whole nother thing about the reopening. So you know that in the next 2 weeks, we open to our members, and then July 1st, we open to the public and our members. And much of what we're able to do is tied to the rules between the county, the state. And so food service is going to start in July again, and it's going to start in a socially or physically distant way with sanitation procedures and all sorts of other things that I don't even know of yet. But you will be able to have lunch at the Huntington. The casualty of this is the tea room. I do not believe the tea room will reopen for the next year. And I know that's a disappointment, but because the tea room is so small, it's impossible to make half or 25% of the capacity and still have it not be viable at all. So we will, we will try to work on that, but for the moment, that's probably not in the cards. I see another question here. Does the Huntington have a list of the books? So the Huntington has contributed to many authors in writing their books. Do we have a list of those books? Well, I do have a list that Steve Hindle, the director of research, gave me that has 10 years worth of books published by people working at the Huntington. And I can find it and I can email it to you. My email is rshulman@huntington.org. And if you email me, I will send you, it's a PDF. But also on the Huntington's website, you might be able to find it. I know that I've got the file. But if you go to Google and you type in Huntington Library Acknowledgement, you will get hundreds of books where it goes to that page where they say, I'd like to thank the people who helped me with my research. It's an incredible number of books. Okay, and then another question here says, will the Huntington be open for members tomorrow? Yes, it will be. But let's talk about what reopening means at the Huntington. We will start tomorrow. From now until we tell you otherwise, you have to have a reservation or a ticket to come to the Huntington. Because of the need for people to be a certain amount of space apart, we cannot have people come, too many people at one time to arrive and to go through the check-in area. So we have a certain number of people per hour that check in. So right now, we have a greatly reduced capacity, and that will continue for the time being and probably into the summer. So would you please bear with us? If you want to come, you have to go to our website. You have to be, if you want to come tomorrow and you're a member, you need a reservation. We had a great release of tickets over the weekend, and it broke the servers because so many people, we have 45,000 members. 38% of the households in San Marino are currently members. So when you announce anything, everybody came at once. So we learned some lessons about doing it over a period of hours, but the system is back up. But for the meantime, please do bear with us. And you also should be prepared to have your temperature taken when you arrive and wear a mask. You must wear a mask. Okay. I'm reading one more comment here. Will you please mention the enormous contribution of the Chinese in building the railroads? Yes, yes. No, you're absolutely right. The person that asked this question, the debt of gratitude to Western culture by the workers that built the railroad is an incredible feat in both in discrimination, but also in the fact of the work that they did. And so, yes, it's a very good point to mention that in my presentation. Why does the Huntington not get grants from the Endowment of Art? So the Huntington yesterday announced a grant from the National Endowment for the Art for an exhibit that's coming up with a work that we're doing with an African artist next year. We also do get ongoing support from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Science Foundation. So we do apply for grants for certain projects that make sense. And so, yeah, that is something we do. There's another question. Will you allow people to walk the outer grounds without a ticket? I'm not sure what the outer grounds are. Coming to the Huntington, driving in, parking your car and walking in, everybody needs a ticket, unfortunately. There are certain membership levels that allow you to come in earlier and walk for your exercise, but there is no inner and outer. There's only one thing. Anybody else have any other questions? You've been very kind to me. I appreciate your bearing with it. It's a longer presentation than we planned. Thank you very much. I'm very proud to be a 25-year resident of San Marino, and thank you for being part of the Huntington, those of you who are active with us.
Thank you, Randy. That was an amazing presentation. I was fortunate enough to get some of those reserve tickets, so I'll be visiting with my family this weekend.
Excellent.
So thank you for that. And Lauren, do you want to have some closing remarks?
Yeah, I'd like to thank certainly Randy. A great talk. I've heard you. I have had the opportunity to hear you speak before, so I'm not surprised. And so we really appreciate you giving up your time. I knew it took a lot to revise that thing and put it back together. So thank you. And also great thanks to our quote 5-minute speakers. We don't expect 5 minutes. We know you can't talk in 5 minutes, but to all those who gave us an update of things that I think were probably pretty interesting to you. And so to all of you, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We'll let you know what anything else is going to happen before September. And so I am going to, first of all, make the announcement that we did not receive any objections to voting in our nominating committee by acclamation. So the committee is president and vice president, and then our immediate past 4 presidents, and then Carol Blaufeld, Kylie Chang, Stephanie Duncan, Janice Lee McMahon, Mike Lynn, and Eugene Sun. And with that, I will move to adjourn. Dr. Choi, would you second that?
I second.
Okay, then the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Great, thank you. Thank you all.